Okay, let's talk about George Floyd. Please don't hate me. I really do want to be a part of the solution. I really do want to be responsible and kind to my neighbors. I really do want to have a beneficial effect here. And I really do want to have a healthy discussion and a hopefully educated and reasonable, intelligent discussion about some of the things that are going on in the world these days. So, when George Floyd got up that morning, he probably didn't know how things were going to transpire, but he made some choices on that day that didn't play very well in his favor. When we think about George Floyd, he's always depicted as, more or less innocent in the situation, and well, I guess we'll never know for sure, but the fact remains that police were called to a store where a shopkeeper identified George Floyd. That man, George Floyd, passed me this money and it's phony, and I think, and so there was no racial profiling going on. They didn't go looking for somebody who looked like a black guy or anything like that. The shopkeeper said, that guy, George Floyd, handed me counterfeit money. So the police went out to question George Floyd. The first two officers stopped him. It was their sworn duty to question George Floyd and take him in for questioning and probably arrest him, because he was identified by the shopkeeper as that man who did this. They didn't really have any judgment, to make on that. So there's that. When George Floyd was stopped, the first two officers that stopped him, they ought to be given a medal, because they were patient and they were extremely considerate, to the extent that they knew that this could be kind of a racially charged incident, and they were being overly cautious to try and be polite, be considerate, be patient with George Floyd. And he was having this anxiety thing, and he would not cooperate. When they first asked him at the car to put his hands on the dashboard, they had to ask him several times to put his hands on the dashboard. And already the cops are getting nervous because he's being cagey. When he did finally put his hands on the dashboard, there's some speculation that he might have tried to put something in his mouth at that time. Now, the police questioned him and they asked him if he was on drugs. He said no, but most of the other people, or well, at least there was reports of people describing him as looking like he was drunk. Now, I don't know if that had something to do with his anxiety or not, but the cops were trying to be generous with him, but there's a point at which you can't keep stalling. I mean, the police have to arrest him. They have to put him in the cruiser. And George won't get in the car. So, and George is not a small guy. He's like 6'2" and 250 pounds or something like that. He's a big man. So, you don't really want to get into a wrestling match with him. But the first two officers they don't deserve a medal because they didn't execute their job efficiently and with enough authority to get George to cooperate. And so because of their overly cautious attitude, that played into how the rest of it transpired. And you have to keep in mind that, well, George is having this anxiety attack, sitting with his back against his wall and his head in his hands and whining and and stressing, he's saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And so when they finally got him in the car, he still wouldn't settle down, and he's still going, I can't breathe, and he's fussing and stressing, and that's when Chauvin showed up. So if you're the officers on duty at that time and you're having such a difficulty getting George Floyd to cooperate, it's been probably more than 15 minutes now that they've been trying to work with George Floyd to get him in the car. So if you're the officers Krung and Lane that are on duty trying to manage this situation, then okay, so then when Chauvin shows up, he's their superior officer, right? He's the senior police officer, and they've already had trouble trying to manage George. So it's kind of they can't really tell Chauvin what to do because they were the ones that couldn't manage the first time, right? And so when Chauvin shows up and George is still fussing in the car and going, I can't breathe, Chauvin pulled him out of the car and put him on the ground. Now, we're talking about police brutality here, police on black brutality, and well, there was a technique that Chauvin used that was on the books and recognized for subduing people in an arrest situation. And subsequently, 17 states have abolished the use of choke holds and choke restraints and so on for subduing perpetrators at arrests. But not on that day. Not on that day. And probably Chauvin has used this technique before. And probably 17 other states have at least employed that technique many times. And other people in his department, and I mean, Chauvin is subject to the attitude, the policy, the atmosphere that is his police department and his precinct. So I don't think he can be held responsible for the entire policy of the police department, generally. But anyway, when Chauvin put him down and put him on the ground and put his knee on George's neck, George was saying, I can't breathe, and asking for his mother. And so the officers on duty wouldn't know that that was any different than when he was saying, I can't breathe, when he was in the car, or when he was, stressing and sitting with his back against the wall and his head in his hands and all that. So how would the officers know that? I myself have taken martial arts training, and if you're dealing with somebody that's maybe armed or dangerous or maybe has a gun or something like that, and you can't, you can't just run away because he'll probably shoot you in the back. So then you want to make sure that you put him in a chokehold, and like a sleeper hold is called a sleeper hold because they're supposed to go to sleep. They're not supposed to die. And remember, George doesn't exactly look like a frail guy. He doesn't look like the kind of guy that's just going to often die just randomly just because. I mean, he's 6'2" and 250 pounds. This is a big guy. He doesn't look frail. He looks pretty robust, right? So if anybody thought that George was just going to die just because, that was probably the furthest thing from anybody's mind. And and if Chauvin even had the slightest inkling that he was applying force on George's neck that would be deadly or have a deadly effect, he wouldn't have done it, right? I mean, when Chauvin, any psychopathic idiot, any 12-year-old kid, any 2-year-old kid knows that if you're going to do something bad, it's probably best that you don't have witnesses standing around watching you when you do it. So if he had any inclination that George was going to die, he wouldn't like, nobody wants to have somebody die while they're standing around with 100 witnesses with cell phones videoing it, right? It had to be the last thing on his, he couldn't possibly have imagined that George was going to die, because nobody signs up for this kind of grief. You know, nobody wants to martyr themselves as the, you know, like the entire nation is now against Derek Chauvin because he's the devil incarnate in, you know, across North America, probably the world. So he wouldn't have done that with any intention of doing that. If you're talking about police brutality, if the police want to have fun roughing a guy up when they're arresting him, usually that involves, you know, taking out their nightsticks and cracking his kneecaps and, you know, knocking him down and kicking him about the head and the guts while he's on the ground, you know, and it wasn't exactly like a party of officers, you know, bullying him with violence. That didn't really happen, right? So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on here that's just not talked about. And I think a lot of that has to do with, the idea that when the incident first started and the crowd started to collect, people with cell phones gathered around to video it. Because what they saw was black and police on black violence, brutality. What they saw really in that sense was an opportunity, right? They wanted to get it on video because they wanted to show the police being rough with a black guy. That's what they're hoping for. They were hoping it would get worse, you know, because they wanted. Now, truly, some of the people, when they stopped and they started videoing it, probably felt that they were being completely philanthropic because they were going to become famous as the person who is championing the rights of black citizens in the face of an overbearing police force that's abusing its authority. But essentially, they wanted to become famous for something. They wanted to get the video uploaded to their web pages and their YouTube channels and so on, so that they would become wealthy and famous and you know, well, at least famous among their friends, if nothing else. I mean, they wanted the best angles, the best camera shots, and so on. That's what they were really worried about. They weren't really worried about so much George. Somewhat, yes. Yeah, they're saying, well, he's not resisting now. You should let him up. And hey, can't you see he's unconscious or whatever? So, but I mean, at that time, if they really cared, they might have maybe thought about calling the ambulance themselves or calling the fire department to, you know, be on side so that some other authority could be there to witness what was going on, to manage the situation somewhat. But they didn't think about what they could do. They just really wanted to get the best angle on the video for them to, you know, show what was going on. Now, that's not necessarily bad or wrong, but long story short is that plays into what happened because they want to tell a certain story. They see the police beating up on a black guy. That's the story they want to tell, and that's how they want to sell it to the news media, and that's how they want to video it, so that when they send the news media, they want it to be as shocking and as salacious and as damaging to the police as they can possibly make it, because That's the narrative that they want to tell. So all the other stuff is irrelevant for them because that doesn't tell their narrative. So really, all they really want to show the news is the Derek Chauvin with his knee on George Floyd's neck saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." The other 10 times that George Floyd said, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," before Chauvin even showed up, that doesn't help their story, so they don't show that part. They probably didn't even start the video until later on. So, long story short is, when the news media gets it, they want to do the same thing, right? They want to sell a narrative that is the police are beating up on black guys. But for my money, that's not what I saw happening there. You know, if Derek Chauvin had any inclination whatsoever that George Floyd was going to die, he wouldn't have done it. So, where does that leave us?